These days, everyone talks about raising money, growing fast, and building a $1 billion company. But here's the question no one asks. How much of that company will you actually own when it's all over? One founder built a successful company, sold it for $60 million, and walked away with nothing. No fraud, no lawsuit, no failed deal, just a cap table. Stories like this are much more common than founders realize. I'm Dr. Christos Kelepouris, and I've spent my career studying how companies are built, financed, and sometimes lost. The biggest mistake founders make usually aren't technical, they're structural. Capitalization, governance, incentives, and deal structure often determine who creates value, but more importantly, who captures it. To explore that, I'm joined by Chris Velis. Chris founded Auris Health, which was acquired by Johnson & Johnson for $5.75 billion. He's been an investment banker, venture capitalist, founder, and board director. Today, we're discussing a real case study that every founder should understand before raising their next dollar. Chris, take it away.
Welcome to the $60 million exit, where the founders got nothing. I'm Chris Velis, and I've seen this story from every side of the table. I've seen it as an investor, I've seen it as a boardroom member, and I've seen it as a founder. I've lived some great outcomes, but I've also seen outcomes that look like wins from the outside, but wipe out the people who actually built the company. And that's what we're going to unpack today. It's a real pattern, and I've seen it happen to very smart founders, including some good friends. I've had close calls myself. And the reality is that most founders never see it coming because the damage is structural. It is in the terms, it's in the stack, it's in the math. And yes, we are going to do some math today, so I pre-recorded a few of the sections, especially the parts that are number heavy, so that the explanation stays clear and precise. But I am here live, and I'll take questions at the end. So let's get started. Be clear about what the next 45 minutes are and what they aren't. This is a case study, real numbers, real mechanics, and real outcomes. It is not a pitch, and I'm not going to ask you to buy anything. I'm going to walk you through the math that determines who gets paid when a company exits. And I'm going to show you where the founders have leverage and where they don't. If at the end you want to go deeper, I'll tell you how. But the goal right now is to make sure that you understand something that most founders don't learn until it costs them. Here's what you walk away with. First, you'll understand why the percentage you own almost never equals the percentage you get paid. Second, you'll see the specific terms buried in every term sheet that decide whether the founders capture value or watch it gets transferred to somebody else. And third, you'll know exactly when you have leverage to negotiate these terms and what happens after that window closes. It isn't theory. This is the math. Let's get into it. Flat rounds are no longer rare. In the first half of 2024, 28.4% of venture financings were flat or down rounds. That was a decade high. Exit pricing power is compressed. Median IPO valuation to revenue multiples moved from roughly 17x in 2021 to about 4x in 2025. Those are public market signals, but private terms follow public reality, usually with a lag. And when pricing power compresses, protections stack. In Q2 2025, only 17% of deals were pari passu, which means in roughly 83% of deals, new money is negotiating senior liquidation preferences over prior rounds. I'll explain that in more detail later. In a bull market, a lot of sins get forgiven. When everything exits at 10x, even bad capital table architecture can still make founders rich. But we're not in that market. So the terms you sign today, liquidation preferences, participation, seniority, will determine your outcome in an exit environment that's far less forgiving. And most founders I talk to, smart founders, successful founders, do not actually know what they agreed to. Before we get into the case, I need to give you a frame. When you raise venture capital, you're not just selling equity. you're plugging into three machines that will run whether you understand them or not. The first is the payout machine, and this determines who gets paid when there's money to distribute, in what order they get paid, and how much. The second is the control machine. This determines who makes decisions, who can block them, and how power shifts as the company evolves. And the third is the employment machine. This determines who stays, who goes, and on what terms. The founder's focus is usually on number one, their ownership percentage. But your outcome is determined by how all three of these machines interact. The founder in our case study owned 22% of his company, and he walked away with zero. It's not because he owned too little, it's because he didn't understand how the gears in this machine worked. Let me tell you about a founder I know, and I'm going to keep the company anonymous, but the numbers are real. He started a medical device company in about 2016. He had an FDA-cleared platform, and it had real clinical utility. And over 3 rounds, he raised $47 million from a mix of healthcare VCs and strategics. By the time he got to Series B, he'd been diluted down to about 22% ownership, and that's not unusual, and it's actually pretty good given the capital intensity of the industry. In 2023, a large strategic acquired the company for $60 million. They wanted the IP, they wanted the team, they wanted the regulatory pathway. Now, if you do some quick math, 22% of 60 million, you might think he walked away with about $13 million, but he didn't. He walked away with zero, less than his VP of engineering, less than his head of regulatory. And let me show you why. Here's how $60 million disappeared. This is called the waterfall. It shows who gets paid and what order they get paid. First, the Series B investors had what's called a senior liquidation preference. They invested $30 million, and their terms said they get their money back first, before anyone else sees a dollar. So $32 million goes out the door. Now we're down to $28 million. But wait, the same investors also had participation rights. That means after they get their preference, they also get to participate in the remaining proceeds as if they were common shareholders. That participation share was $18 million. Now we got $10 million left on the table. Then there are the transaction costs, escrows, a small carve-out for key employees, another $4 million. We're at $6 million left for common shareholders. So there's $6 million left for the common shareholders. The founder owns 22% of the company, so he gets 22% of the $6 million, right? No. His 22% of the fully diluted cap table, the common pool, that's what's left after the preferences, gets split among all the common holders, including the option pool. And when you do the math, his actual share of the remaining $6 million is about 15%. And that's $900,000 before taxes. After federal and state taxes, legal fees, escrow holdback, that may never get released because of post-close intellectual property indemnities, he'll net effectively zero. $60 million exit, 22% ownership, $0. And that's what kills me. He spent 7 years building an FDA-cleared technology, navigating 510(k) submissions, regulatory approvals, building a regulatory team, and he didn't know this outcome was possible until the wire transfer hit. This is the rule that most founders don't learn until it's too late. Ownership percentage doesn't equal the payout percentage. When someone tells you that you own 22% of the company, they're calculating it on a fully diluted basis, as if all the preferred stock converted to common. But when there's a payout and the preferred doesn't convert, it takes the preferences first. Your percentages is a number on a spreadsheet. Your payout is what's left after that machine runs. If you remember nothing else from today, remember these 4 terms. They're in every term sheet. They look standard, but they determine whether you capture value or you watch a transfer. The first is liquidation preference. This determines who gets paid first and how much. A 1x preference means investors get their money back before common shareholders see anything. A 2x preference means they get double their money back first. The market standard's 1x, but in tough fundraising environments, you'll see higher multiples. The second is participation rights. This is the double dip. Non-participating preferred means investors choose. They take their preferences or they convert to common and share proportionately. Participating preferred means they get both, preference first, and then they participate in what's left. That's what killed our founder. His Series B had full participation. Third, anti-dilution. This determines what happens to investor ownership in a down round. Full ratchet means if your next round is at a lower price, investors get repriced as if they invested at the lower price. Weighted average is more founder friendly. In a down round environment, this term can shift millions in outcome. Fourth, and this one is sneaky, cumulative dividends. Preferred stock often accrues interest. It's typically 6 to 8% annually. And while that may sound small in this environment, 6 or 7 or 8% over 7 years is not. 8% over 7 years, that's 56%. It compounds. That $32 million preference becomes $55 million before anyone else sees a dollar. And it matters whether that accrues before or after the multiple is applied. Most founders never do this math until the wire transfer. So note, we didn't include cumulative dividends in the earlier example. It would have wiped out all the incentives for the employee stock option plan. Here's another place founders lose equity without realizing it. I call it the option pool shuffle. Before Series B, our founder owned 35% and had a 15% option pool. The incoming investor says, we want a 22% pool post money for future hires. And that sounds completely reasonable because you need to hire. But here's the trick. That pool expansion comes out of the pre-money valuation, not the post-money valuation. Let's look at what it actually does to your compensation and it actually does to the management team at exit. Watch the founders line here. Before Series B, they're at 35%. After the pool expansion, before a single dollar comes in, they're at 32%. Already 3 points lost. Then Series B takes their 32% and the founders land at 22%. That 3% they lost to the pool shuffle on a $60 million exit is equivalent to $1.8 million, and it's gone before the round even closed. Option pool expansion costs round after round. This is completely standard, and it happens in almost every round. Most founders don't realize the math until they see it in their final cap table. And the question you should ask before negotiating every round, and in consideration of your own compensation, is it reasonable that the cost of the employee pool expansion excludes new investors and cost founding management team every single round? Remember I said the founder made less than their VP of engineering? That sounds impossible. The founder started the company, took all the early risk, and owned 22%. The VP joined at Series A with a standard equity grant. So how does that math work? It works because executives negotiate different instruments with different protections. And understanding that difference is the key to protecting yourself. So let me show you the stack nobody explains. There are 3 layers to every company structure. The legal layer, that's what the documents say. The economic layer, how money actually flows. And the governance layer, who gets to decide things. Founders typically optimize for the legal layer. They negotiate ownage percentageship, board seats, protective provisions. Executives optimize for the economic layer. They negotiate cash compensation, acceleration triggers, bonus structures, and transaction bonuses. Boards control the governance layer, and the governance layer can override both of the others. When you understand this stack, you understand why a VP with 1% ownership can out-earn a founder with 22. The VP's 1% came with a different set of protections than the founder's 22%. Look at this side by side. Founders typically hold common stock that sits beneath the entire liquidation preference stack. They usually have no acceleration on their equity if they're terminated. They rarely negotiate transaction bonuses. They often have no severance, and in an M&A, they're usually excluded from management carve-out pools. Executives hired 2 or 3 years after founding typically negotiate double trigger acceleration, which means their equity vests if there's an acquisition and they're terminated. They negotiate transaction bonuses, often 3 to 12 months of salary paid at closing. They have severance protection, and they're usually included in carve-out pools that boards create to incentivize management to close deals. This isn't unfair. Executives negotiate for this because they have leverage. The company needs them to stay. The question is, why don't founders negotiate the same protections? So how did the VP of Engineering actually get paid in our case study? Well, there's 4 mechanisms. First, the board created a carve-out pool, a chunk of the acquisition proceeds set aside to incentivize management to close the deal. This came off the top before the waterfall. In medtech acquisitions or any acquisitions, this is especially common because the acquirer needs the regulatory team, the engineering team, and often a large part of the rest of the team to stay and manage post-market requirements. Second, the VP has a transaction bonus in their employment agreement, cash paid at closing regardless of what the equity was worth. Third, double trigger acceleration meant her unvested equity vested at closing. And since she was being retained by the acquirer to manage the 510K transition, and equity got rolled into an acquirer stock at a very favorable rate. Fourth, the acquirer offered a retention package, additional cash and equity to keep people through the integration. Add it all up, and a VP with 1 to 1.5% ownership netted more than a founder with 22%, not because the system is corrupt, but because she negotiated different instruments. Here's the truth table. In a home run exit, that's 10x or higher, everyone will do well. The preferences get paid and there's still plenty left over. Your ownership percentage will roughly equal your payout. In a solid exit, 2 to 4 times the capital raised, your outcome becomes highly term dependent. This is where the structures we've been discussing matter enormously. Small differences in preferences and participation can swing founder outcomes by millions. And in a messy exit, less than 2x capital raise, founders are often underwater. This is where executives who negotiated cash protections outperform founders who negotiated equity. The uncomfortable truth is that most exits are solid or messy, not home runs. The distribution of outcomes is not kind to founders who only optimize for home run scenarios. I want to be clear about something. The people on the other side of the table aren't evil. They are repeat players. A venture investor might do 50 deals in a career. A startup lawyer might do 500. They have seen every scenario. They know which terms matter, they know which don't. They know what they can get, and they know where there's going to be pushback. They're optimizing for their portfolio, not your individual outcome. And it's not a moral judgment. It's just the game. It's just how it works. The problem for founders is that you're usually a one-time player in a repeat player's game. You negotiate 1 or 2 term sheets in your life. You don't have the pattern recognition of someone who's done it 50 or 500 times. You don't know what standard is because you've never seen 50 other deals. The knowledge asymmetry is not malicious, but it is real. And the only way to close it is to learn what the repeat players know. Here I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask you to take 15 seconds and read the 7 items on this page. And I'm going to ask you to write down which one of the 7 moves you're likely to use in your next negotiation. I'll be back to you in another 10 seconds. So the next point is that leverage is perishable. So let me show when you can negotiate what. Before you sign a term sheet, you have maximum leverage. You can walk away, You can create competition. You can negotiate almost anything. This is when liquidation preferences, participation rights, board compensation, and founder protections need to be discussed. At the term sheet stage, you still have significant leverage, but the negotiation is narrowing. The investor has signaled intent. You can still push back on terms, but the major changes are now beginning to get harder. And at closing, you're now finalizing documents. Small changes are possible, but the commercial terms really are set, and this is not the time to renegotiate participation rights. Post-close, things get harder. Your leverage is now minimal. The money is committed, the documents are signed, and what you have is what you're going to live with. Most founders try to negotiate CEO protections, acceleration, and founder-friendly terms after the term sheet is signed, and that's backwards. The window is before you sign. Founder protection isn't one thing. It's 4 buckets that need to work together. Economic protections determine what happens to your equity and cash in various scenarios. This includes acceleration triggers, transaction bonuses, and inclusion in management carve-outs. Governance protections determine your control and information rights. That's board seats, founder consent rights for major decisions, and information access. Employment protections determine what happens if you're pushed out, severance terms, how cause is defined, and notice periods. Exit protections determine your options at liquidity. Can you sell secondary shares? What drag-along thresholds apply? Do you have tag-along rights if someone else sells? Most founders negotiate governance protections in the term sheet and ignore the other 3 buckets. The executives and founders who outperform them negotiate all 4. In my mind, this is one of the most important slides and set of concepts. Good governance is not about control forever. It's about stage-appropriate structures that prevent conflicts before they happen. At seed, founder control is appropriate. Minimal board, maximum flexibility. At Series A, you want balance. Maybe 2 founders, 1 investor, or 2 founders, 2 investors, and 1 independent. By Series B and beyond, the company needs independent oversight. This is actually founder-friendly if it's designed right. An independent compensation committee means CEO comp is benchmark against market, approved by people without conflicts, and defensible to future investors. The founders who get in trouble are the ones who fight for control when they should be designing governance systems that protect them and the company through neutrality. Here, I want to emphasize what I think is one of the most important concepts in the construction of a board, and that is the idea of independent directors who are free from any conflict. In my eyes, ideally, that means free from having made an investment, free from significant equity ownership, and completely 100% aligned with the stakeholders involved with the company. Here's the founder paradox. You often have the most equity and the least protection. Executives have employment agreements with severance, acceleration, and sometimes transaction bonuses. Founders often have almost nothing, just stock sitting under a preference stack. The solution isn't to demand an executive package from day one. The solution is to benchmark your CEO comp as a founder against market and negotiate founder-specific protections at key financing moments. Never assume the board is going to protect you automatically. A good board will, but a good board is luck. Design your protection into the documents. I want to talk about your approach to negotiating these things. I mean, that fundamentally boils down to how do you ask and how to communicate with board members and investors in order to get yourself covered. And the first point I want to make is that this doesn't have to be a process of conflict. In fact, that's mostly where things begin to go terribly wrong. Instead, what I want you to think about is how you frame the question and the arguments behind them. And you want to frame them in terms of alignment instead of in terms of founder greed or what you deserve or some problem that someone else needs to solve for you. So here's some examples. Instead of, I want a transaction bonus, ask, how do we make sure that the team gets this company to exit is still motivated at close? And by the way, that team includes you. 2, instead of, what protections do I get? Ask, what's the standard founder protection package in your portfolio companies? Here's another one. I'm worried about a downside scenario. Well, instead of expressing your worry, say, how do we structure this so everyone is aligned if the exit is smaller than we hope? These are not tricks, they're framing things properly, and they're invitations for collaboration instead of triggering defense. And that is what I most often see in these discussions. Defensive triggers. The ones that I see that are successful are the ones where defense isn't triggered and alignment is what is sought between management, founders, and the board, and new investors. My colleagues and I have spent a considerable amount of our career for ourselves, on behalf of our funds, and for our friends, colleagues, those that we mentor, and the boards of directors we're on, examining what it is that makes some founders have successful outcomes while others struggle. And capital architecture and payout, as we just discussed, was one of the key areas. We actually found that there are 7. Founder psychology and resilience, the question of, can you sustain a challenging journey, is number 1. The second was brand authority and market position. Do you control your narrative? As we just discussed, 3, capital architecture and payout mechanics. Number 4 is negotiation under asymmetry. Can you hold your own against repeat players? 5, governance and control engineering. Who really makes decision, and how do you develop a board of directors that's effective? 6, systems for scale. Can you grow without becoming the bottleneck? And finally, 7, exit orchestration and legacy. Will you exit on your terms?
What Chris just walked you through is one lesson from the AEIOU operating system. You see, most founders spend years mastering their product, yet very few spend the same amount of time mastering the architecture of company building. AEIOU's core is an operating system built from real deals, real failures, and real exits. Together, we cover the disciplines that determine not only whether a company succeeds, but ultimately who benefits from that success. The program combines expert-led coursework with live facilitation sessions led by Chris and myself. Together, we work through real companies, real decisions, and real founder challenges. You'll learn from other founders, operators, investors, and experts who have built, financed, governed, scaled, and successfully exited their companies. For healthcare innovators, AEIOU Medical includes the full AEIOU core, plus 8 additional courses designed to help you take your idea from bench to bedside. The white paper, which provides a deeper analysis of this case and the applications, are linked below. The lesson is simple. Creating value and capturing value are not always the same thing, because building a company is one challenge, and keeping what you build, well, that's another.